My name is Michael Shoemate and welcome to Logo Design Theory, how branding design really works. Legibility is one of the rock-bottom basics in graphic design, but it's not as easy as some people think. Let's talk about it. Basic terms. Before we launch into a discussion of color, let's make sure we are using the same language. Three terms may be used in describing any given color. First is hue, how colors distinguish themselves from each other in the rainbow or in the spectrum. Yellow is different from orange and from red, etc. It is how colors are differentiated around a color wheel. Second is saturation, the relative richness or dullness of a color. All colors in the spectrum are fully saturated, except at the ends where they lapse into black. Dusty rose is less saturated, or more neutral, than pink. Olive is a less saturated version of yellow-green. The third term is value, which is the inherent lightness or darkness of a color. Going around a properly constructed color wheel, the lightest color is yellow, and the darkest is blue. We have names for several dozen colors, even if we might not agree on exactly what each color is. Of the more than 2 million colors that a normal human eye can discern, each one can be described using these three terms: hue, saturation, and value. The way we would use 3 axis points to determine the position of something in three-dimensional space, or the size of something using height, width, and depth. Legibility. When we can see and read what is written or perceive the elements of a picture, we call that legibility. Legibility is a function of contrast. Of the 3 qualities of colors we just defined, hue, saturation, and value, the one that matters most for contrast is value. Saturation and hue hardly make a difference, especially when distance or small size is involved. To sum up so far, legibility is a function of contrast, and contrast is a function of value. In graphic design, nothing compensates for a lack of legibility. No concept, no style or fashion, no coolness factor. I repeat, nothing compensates for a lack of legibility. Without it, no one even sees or correctly perceives your work. This is fundamental. A good tool for accurately describing value is Tint Percentage, developed in the printing industry. Halftone tints cover an area with a small uniform grid of dots on paper, often smaller than can be seen with the naked eye. In a 70% halftone tint, for instance, 70% of the paper is covered in ink, and only 30% of the paper has no ink. These halftone tint percentages should be second nature to all graphic designers. Contrast differential. The amount of contrast between any type and its background can be calculated by subtracting the lesser value percentage from the greater. This is the contrast differential. A good rule of thumb for excellent contrast is 60% difference or more. Black type on white paper is 100% difference, the greatest contrast possible, whereas 35% contrast differential is minimal. Is it physically possible to read below that threshold? Yes, of course. But is it convenient or comfortable? No. And what is the function of graphic design? To aid communication, not impede it. Why would any sane designer try to make their message anything less than convenient or comfortable to read? There is no good reason. When to reverse and when to surprint. If one accepts the logic of the foregoing, one would naturally think that a designer would be safe to place black type on a background as dark as 40 or 50%. The reality is that such type is tiresome, even oppressive to read. Why is that? White reflects all light available, and black absorbs it. Therefore, white is a stimulus to our visual system, and black is the absence of a stimulus. So when we read black type on a 50% background, we are seeing a non-stimulus against a half-stimulus. On the other hand, when we read white type on the same background, we are seeing a strong stimulus against a half-stimulus. That's why it's inherently easier and why reverse type, even at minimum cutoff, seems to have better contrast. In practical application, the cutoff for comfortable surprinting and reversing isn't at the 50% mark, but at about the 35% mark. Does that strike you as an odd number? It might, until you remember the golden section, the Fibonacci sequence, and its modern counterpart, the rule of thirds. The ancient Greeks discovered a particular proportion that kept cropping up in many different places in nature. They called this the golden mean, or the golden section. They considered it a divine ratio, and sought to use it in some of their buildings and sculptures. Leonardo Fibonacci, a pre-Renaissance mathematician, discovered a sequence of numbers where each adjacent pair of numbers gave the golden section proportion, more or less. In modern times, photographers and other students of visual arts are often instructed in the law of thirds, which states that compositions will seem most dynamically balanced if major elements are placed within the picture plane at a location of 1/3 and 2/3. And so it is with the question when to surprint and when to reverse. Surprint dark areas over backgrounds up to about 35%. Reverse light type over backgrounds from 35% to 100%. In practical terms, there are twice as many colors over which a reversal will work compared to those that will work for surprinting. That's just a fact of visual reality and essential for good contrast. I hope you can see that there are real principles we can rely on when it comes to assuring that we have good contrast in our designs, general and in branding design in particular. These principles are not just my opinion. They are based on the physics of human eyesight. They are neither arbitrary nor outmoded. Anyone who ignores these principles in the name of being more modern or creative is just spitting in the wind. If you break true principles, all you really accomplish is to break your work. There are lots more principles we'll discuss in future videos that will give you a strong foundation to better branding design. For more information, go to logodesigntheory.com. If you found this useful, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it with anyone who needs to know more about branding design.